It is June, which means it's time for the Queerlit Readathon, and this year it is the full month of June rather than just the week. So I'm going to be vlogging my way through it. I'm going to attempt to release a vlog for each week. It's been a while since I really put up any videos because a lot of stuff has happened. If you follow me on Instagram, you know. If you don't follow me on Instagram, you can go over there and find out because I don't really want to talk about it. But I thought I would start out talking a little bit about my TBR. I already know I'm going to deviate from this a little bit just because I found at least one other thing outside of it after I made it and put it up on Instagram. You'll notice that there's quite a bit of nonfiction, which is not out of the norm for me at all, but alongside the Queerlit Readathon, I'm also going to be doing the nonfiction summer bingo card that Bookish Sociologist put out, and that's something that lasts from June through August. But I'm going to try to hit as many things as possible on that too. And there's going to be a separate video talking about my TBR for that, so if you're interested, you can check that out hopefully soon. I'm going to try to just go very quickly through my TBR and just show you all. I'm not going to talk too much about them, but I'll put which prompts they go with on the screen. And I'm going to start out with a few buddy reads that I'm planning to do. A Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics by Olivia Waite. We Both Laughed in Pleasure, The Selected Diary of Lou Sullivan, which I don't know if I'm going to end up finishing this month, but I know that we plan to start it this month. And then another buddy read, Real Life by Brandon Taylor, and Confessions of a Fox, which I have on audiobook through Hoopla. Then after that, I have the only non-buddy read fiction book, which is Nama by Sarah Blake, which I started like 2020 or 2021 and then stopped for no good reason. So I plan on actually finishing it this month. I also have the audiobook for Icebreakers. And then I have some poetry with The Man with the Night Sweats by Thom Gunn, and These Godforsaken Notes, and Irreverent Poet's Memory Loss Memoir by Hill Hoover. And this one is a pretty new indie published book. I know the person who read it, which is the only reason that I found out about it. And I've seen some of their poetry here and there online. So I'm excited for that one. Then I've got a graphic nonfiction, Taking Turns by M.K. Czerwiec. Now, I'm not sure whether or not this is actually going to count for this readathon because I think, I could be wrong, and I'll probably put something up here if I am wrong. I think that we're only supposed to be reading books by queer authors, and I'm not sure if the person who wrote this is queer. It's about a nurse who worked in an HIV/AIDS ward. So it definitely ties into queer history. Then I have Abolition Democracy by Angela Davis, which is not strictly about queer history, but it is written by a lesbian author. Angela Davis is great. I'm super excited to keep reading her works. I've read Freedom is a Constant Struggle and Our Prison's Obsolete. They were both really good. Then I have Life as a Unicorn, A Journey from Shame to Pride, and Everything in Between, which is a memoir by The Hidden Culture, History, and Science of Bisexuality. And finally, Queercore, How to Punk a Revolution. So these are books that I'm hoping to get to this month. I'm not sure that it's realistic of me to read all of them, but this is at least the selection that I have to pick from. And while I have had this figured out for a little bit, The book that I think I'm gonna start with today is not on here, which I guess is kind of on brand. I'm bad at sticking to TBRs, but I have volume 4 of Doughnuts Under a Crescent Moon, which I did not know came out in March, and I found it at work the other day, so I'm going to be probably starting off with this one. I finished volume 4 of Doughnuts Under a Crescent Moon. It was super cute. There's a really cute plot line with Hinako and her mom that I thought was really sweet. And then kind of some of the other plot lines with their friends continued onto this volume. I don't know. It was really sweet. And also, they don't really use any labels in these books, but the experiences that it seems to be representing, they're both asexual, which is just cool. They're asexual lesbians, and I would think that Asahi is probably demi-romantic too, so that's just neat. But it was sweet and nice. It was cool to see a manga that has like adults in it. It's not set in high school, and I feel like a lot of the romancy ones, at least the queer romancy ones that I've seen, are set there. And there's also no sexual content, so if you're not into that or not in the mood for that, this is just purely, cute and good. So yeah, that's what I've got. I'm not too sure what I'll be reading next. I really want to finish up my book blanket to where I was at last month, in case you don't know, which I think I've only talked about it on like maybe a video or two. Some people crochet weather blankets, I think, are the most popular, where you do a certain color for certain temperature. I'm doing one for my reading, so I have got a type of stitch for audiobook, ebook, and physical book, and then I've got certain genres assigned to different colors, and each book can have up to 2 colors because I do 2 strands of yarn. This is what it looks like so far. I'm in the middle of the last row that I need, so just one more of like the rest of this, and then I'll be totally caught up with May. So I think I may watch YouTube videos until I finish this, and then probably start maybe one of my nonfictions. I'm not really in an audiobook mood yet, which I need to, hopefully be in the mood for at least one, because one of them is a buddy read. But it's only the first, I think, so I'm not exactly on a time crunch. Now I'm ready to start in another book. So we will be starting on Queercore, How to Punk Revolution, which is an oral history of the queer punk movement from 1969 throughout. I'm not really sure what years it ends. I think in the table of contents, it has essays definitely through the 90s, and then there's a little bit about like where are people now, so I'm not sure what exactly that's gonna look like, but I guess I'll find out soon. lady needed a bath. Oh, now she's got to give herself another bath because I didn't do a good enough job. What a little lady. Do you want next in line for bath? I'm thinking that's probably a no. Alright, it is the 4th now. I started I Hope We Choose Love, a trans girl's notes from the end of the world by Cheng, Thom. A couple of days ago. Queercore was not in the room that I was in. This was on my end table. So I started reading it. It's one that I have had for a while. I kind of intended to read it last month and it didn't happen, so I'm glad that it happened now. This is an essay collection. It's mostly essays with some poetry as well. And she kind of goes through and talks about a variety of different topics, but the main theme that goes throughout it is love. But in looking at these different topics, which range from like the way that the queer community deals with or doesn't deal with like accountability and kind of the stronghold that the kind of carceral mentality has on people, to the idea of consent, to storytelling, to the idea of chosen family, to her experiences as a Chinese person in the diaspora. So throughout all these different topics, we can see the ways in which we kind of fall short as a community, and how we love each other, and how we can kind of go beyond that and think of new ways to love each other in order to make a better future. Ways to imagine a future where queer people aren't, oppressed and marginalized in the way that they currently are. I really liked a lot of this. I do think that there were a couple of essays that I would have liked a little bit more explanation on, like the one where she talks about her friends having kids. I feel like I got what she was trying to say, but I also feel like I wish that there was a little bit more. I'm also finding that it's pretty interesting. I don't know if interesting is the right word. But reading stuff that's like cultural criticism, like adjacent since the pandemic started, like that was published before the pandemic started. Just because I feel like there's a lot to kind of add to the conversation that she's having. Like, she talks a lot about cancel culture and Me Too and stuff, and I feel like that's developed since 2019. But also I feel like there's so much to talk about in terms of like how we've been doing queer community since the pandemic started, in particular spaces like now like not masking and things like that, and having like no little to no kind of thought and how that impacts like disabled queers, or like literally anyone else for that matter. But anyways, this was good. I'm glad that I finally got to it because it's been on my TBR forever. I think I gave it like 4 stars or something like that. Star ratings are so bizarre though, and I don't think that I want to go to like not doing them because I like to have some sort of metric, but it's just weird, like the way that I gave this 4 stars and then earlier gave like a graphic novel 4.5 stars. Like, they're very different things. And maybe that's assumed that it's already considered in this idea of like a star system, but I don't know. It's really bizarre, and I go through phases of like heavily overthinking whether or not I should like adjust my rating system, but I don't know. I'm just talking. I'm definitely going to continue reading Queercore. I've gotten a little further through it, and I don't really know what to think yet. As you're going through each chapter, you're hearing from different people who were on these particular scenes at these particular times. And there's some interesting stuff. I just kind of wish, I think that there was more, like a little bit of like narrative, like, or not narrative, but just regular writing beforehand to situate who everyone is, because I feel like I'm going to be doing like a lot of Googling to figure out who some of these folks are, and probably not all of them are going to come up. So, and a little bit about like kind of the differences in some of the scenes, because it's interesting to hear what these people have to say, but I'm just missing some context and these folks' backgrounds, because like I think I've read like maybe like 3 chapters at this point, and like there's one where they've kind of talked about the issue of race in that particular scene. In the other ones they didn't, and with some of the stuff that I was saying, I was just like, this feels like very white, but I don't really know who all of these people are, what their backgrounds are, and I feel like we get such small blips, and I don't know if it's like a conversation that they're having. I don't know, I just have a lot of questions. There are some interesting anecdotes. It's not bad, but I am currently kind of wanting more, and am a little bit disappointed with the way that it's set up. Maybe it'll come together by the end, though. I'm not sure. I'm not really all that far into it. It is day 5 of Pride. Hopefully today will be a good reading day like yesterday was. I just was able to sit and read for a couple of hours, which was not the case the 2 days prior. I am at Target currently. I don't know if I'll end up getting any footage of my shopping trip because I can, but 2 kind of main goals outside of reading. One is to return my citronella candle, because while it is off-brand, it's citronella. You'd think for all intents and purposes it would repel mosquitoes, but I did not read the fine print that said that it actually isn't intended to do that. So it is useless to me. I do not want to burn a citronella scented candle that does nothing. It doesn't, what is the point? And I'm also hopefully going to find a pitcher with a lid that costs less than $10. Ideally less than $5. I have kind of been on the lookout for this. Maybe I haven't looked at Safeway. Target doesn't have them. They do have some, but they're like glass and weirdly shaped and over $10. They have $3 ones without lids. Who is having a pitcher without lids? How do you put it in the fridge? Aren't bugs gonna get in it? Like, not in the fridge, but like if you put it outside. I really want to make sweet tea. Like cold sweet tea. It's just been a while since I had it, and I think it would be fun to know how to make it. I've seen people do it. So, those are the plans. We'll see what happens. We'll see if any friends come to visit their food set up. I have finished taking turns. I actually managed to read it all outside, which is great. I didn't film this outside because I'm self-conscious doing videos outside with the neighbors being so close. However, this was amazing. I kind of have trouble putting all of it into words. So with the subtitle, you can see that this is about a particular AIDS unit in Chicago. It's also kind of the memoir of the author kind of going into nursing and her experience through basically being a nurse in an HIV and AIDS ward. But it also gives you the history of this particular unit, which is unique. I don't know exactly where all other hospitals were. However, I have an idea of what was happening in a lot of areas. I think the more of the stories that I've heard were kind of about like early on when a lot of nurses would refuse to go into rooms, would leave, like I think even like in Pose, there's a scene where the nurse just like leaves the food on the floor instead of taking it into the room. And a lot of the nursing in Queercore was done more on a volunteer basis, oftentimes by people who weren't even really medical professionals doing a lot of the work. However, this particular unit, which from a lot of the stuff that she described, there were a lot of queer people who were involved, like, at this particular hospital. And the hospital was kind of like in or near like a gay sort of hub of Chicago. That's at least my like understanding. I don't think she says that explicitly, but that's what it seemed like reading it. But the way that things worked in that, I think, are a wonderful, maybe not like exact model, but the beginning of a really wonderful model that a lot more healthcare needs to take. The relationship between care, whether it was nurses or doctors or the volunteers, the relationship between care and the patients who had AIDS was a lot more personable. Rather than standing over them and talking, they would sit on the bed. A lot of them were friends with each other to a certain extent. And there's also a big focus on the psychological parts of it. Like, there was a whole room dedicated to art therapy, and they had a person who, I guess, kind of like specialized in that. And it was really beautiful to see. I know I've read things about, just like articles and whatnot in school about like people who, particularly like in feminist classes, about people who want to change what birthing looks like, and so the idea of, instead of having like a sterile white room with a hospital bed and a shitty couch, actually have something that's more warm and inviting. So this isn't something that I've like never heard of before, but it was really cool to see it in practice in a whole unit, especially around something that's so fraught. Like, I guess because I've seen so much of like the negative side of healthcare, I guess, around this and the stuff that I've read, between the stuff that I described earlier and then also like the struggle to get like inclusion for women and people of color into trials for new drugs and things like that. So a lot of like bad parts of the medical industry. But I think this is like kind of using this unit as like a case study. I think this can like show some ways that healthcare can really take a different route, especially if you dig into like the people who actually live there. So people who are in the community, being the doctors, the big, I think they also talked about the volunteers who were there as well, were community members. Especially like in the beginning, of all of this, the AIDS unit basically worked as, part ICU, part hospice in a lot of ways. And I think at the very least, most of these things would be transferable to hospice, to maybe more intensive, like cancer wards and stuff like that. I'm not a medical professional at all. I've studied English and sociology, so that's whatever. I just think that a lot could be taken out of this. Unfortunately, I think that a big reason why the medical industry doesn't really take this kind of look a lot of the time is because of capitalism. It's hard to, mass produce this sort of thing. It's also like incredibly taxing on the individuals who are in the healthcare settings. I think you would have to have particular people for particular jobs. So I don't really know how the logistics of all of that would work. And I think especially looking at like the sort of toll that like COVID took on medical professionals, I feel like there's also probably nuance to look in with that too. But that's interesting to think about, and I think that someone who is more familiar with medical settings and like stuff like that, like I would be fascinated to see people write about that more. But on top of that, this also, a lot of the story centered around grief and death, and that was there was a lot in that was really powerful. And in particular, like, any stuff that you're going to read about the AIDS epidemic, it's going to talk about death and grief. But I think what stood out to me in this one was kind of how she showed a little bit about kind of her own foray into art as therapeutic, as well as a hobby or whatever. And also some of the discussions that she had with other doctors and stuff about how to navigate that. I think that's some really important conversation. I had a lot of thoughts about it personally. I have 2 books on grief sitting on my bedside table that I haven't opened yet that seem a little scary. But I think that, I don't know, this was just really good in that regard too. But I definitely gave that one 5 stars. Highly recommend it. I think that it's really, I would probably blanket recommend it to most people who would even be interested in like memoir or gay history. And I feel like it also gives a decent, but not too deep or detailed, like that's not the main focus, but I think it gives a decent rundown of what HIV is, some of the other things that they would have been dealing with, like it mentions the different like cancers and pneumonias and stuff like that they can get kind of in these simple graphics. So if you're not familiar with HIV and AIDS, I think that it has information like that can be useful if you're wanting to learn more. It also gives kind of a timeline as well. It doesn't go into any of the political aspects, which is, this might be the first one that I've read that doesn't, in terms of, well, it does talk some about the parents or families being, some of them being not present, and that sort of bigotry, but it doesn't talk about like the FDA or Ronald Reagan or any of that really. So it doesn't give you insight on that part. Not that everything should have every aspect. It's not a criticism, that's just a fact. But in other ways, it shows you the kind of timeline of HIV in the United States in terms of what sort of resources were available, or what sort of treatments rather were available, and what it would have looked like even in a hospital that was more prepared than most other people or places would be. Like, this is, at least from my understanding, is some of the more, not like top of the line, it's not like they were talking about like the care that celebrities were getting, which for all I know is could have been more, or whatever. I don't know. But the hospital was more well equipped than a lot of other ones were. And this is still kind of the trajectory that they had. So that, and there's also, I think, a graphic about AIDS deaths and stuff like that. So it can kind of give you a picture of what things looked like in the height of that in the United States. So that was a lot of talking. I don't know if I need to keep all that in, but here we are. It was very good. I highly recommend it. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do next. I do need to finish Queercore. I would also like to start Real Life sometime in the next couple days. That's one of the buddy reads that I'm doing with Sage. But I've got to decide whether or not I want to go into The Man with the Night Sweats, because I feel like that would go really well with taking turns. I don't know if that would be too dark right this second or not, but we'll see what happens.
Very seductive. Super confident. Okay, you're auto drag. What's your seductive? What's your dance? I kind of go straight, like go right up to them, direct. I usually make like an offhanded comment about being attracted.
Not that anybody asked, but I have to rate the bubbles. The bubbles themselves would be 5 out of 5. But the Dollar Tree scented bubbles, only like a 3 out of 5. It was only like $1. The smell, only okay. And the bubbles, or like the solution, I think is more dense than normal bubbles. As they go down really fast. There's not really much of the float factor. But the good news is this was only $1, and now I have a bubble wand to make my own out of Dawn. Although a bonus of this is that it's not as like thick and soapy if you get the solution on you. Still would rather have slightly better bubbles, but it's good stuff. And that's it for week 1 of Pride Month. We're now into week 2, and I just haven't done the outro to this video yet. So in week 1, I finished these 3 books and started reading these 3, and I'm still in the middle. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next vlog.